So again, welcome, and of course, a massive thank you to our 4 presenters who are going to present today. Now, this is a big deal for a lot of people to present on their work, to organise themselves, to select images, to put together words and thoughts around the work that they've been creating over many years, some people. And what I try to do is theme these Sharing Connects each month to have a little bit of a different focus, because the whole point of this is to really showcase the incredible diversity of mosaic art and to showcase the incredible talents of so many people in our community. Now, some of these people are part of my studio, or my students, and others are not. They're just friends and colleagues from the international mosaic community. So I try to theme each month a little differently so that we can focus on a different style of art or a different approach or a different thought process. So far we've had people discussing working in series, as well as narrative and symbolism in mosaic. And then today our theme is creative inspiration. Next month in March, we are going to be focusing on collaboration. And then in April, I have a lovely lineup of people who are working with natural materials. And then I have a plan as we move forward this year to bring in other disciplines and other focus areas as well. So I'd just like to introduce firstly our 4 presenters today. I'd just firstly like to introduce Sally.
Hi, everybody.
Okay, so then we've got Sally, and then we've next got Galia. And we have Rachel Bremner from Tasmania.
Hello.
And we have Saskia Kremer from Sydney.
Hello, everyone. So lovely to see you all.
And each of these wonderful artists is going to present for about 15 to 20 minutes on their work. And I'll have a little bit of time to discuss what they've presented. And then we'll move on to the next presenter. So firstly, Sally. So Sally Zylberberg I'm very blessed to have Sally as one of my students. We've known each other for quite some time through the mosaic community in Australia. And she joined the studio probably about 5 years ago. And Sally's in my mentoring group, which is an online class for intermediate and above students. And many of those class members are here today supporting Sally. So Sally, feel the love of your classmates today. And Sally's had a very, very extensive artistic career in training professionally in sculpture and in ceramics before she's moved into more dedicated mosaic practice.
Thanks, Caitlin, for that lovely introduction. And it's indeed a thrill to be here, and I feel honoured in this illustrious company. Okay, so I thought I'd start today by talking a little about my background. I was born and brought up in Johannesburg, South Africa. The school I attended regarded art as a soft option. As I was good at Latin, I was not allowed to do art. From school, I went straight to university in Cape Town and did a degree in psychology, followed by an honours degree. Knowing how we tick became my mantra. Then I got married and we came to Australia. That was in the mid-60s. My working life and study, I was doing a master's degree in psychology at Macquarie University, were cut short by the illness and then death of our beautiful youngest child, Charlie. He was 9 at the time. Ceramics became my salve. I started off with night classes, progressed through a full-time ceramic a certificate course to an associate diploma. Slowly, over the years, my work morphed towards sculpture, as with confidence, my experimentation with form and materials grew. I discovered I had things to say and problems to solve. My inspiration for my sculpture has always been from my thoughts. There are themes regarding human frailty and human foibles, human rights, gender bias, refugees and their plight, and fairness generally, that are dear to me, giving opportunities for interpretation. We had so many advantages as immigrants. We were educated, English-speaking, and came from a similar climate and culture. We were also warmly welcomed, as although South Africa was no longer in the Commonwealth, we were afforded special status. And yet it was hard. I felt so sorry for those that had none of the advantages we had had. No one wants to leave their country of origin if things are going well. Our motivation was political. At the time we left, there were draconian laws of 90-day detention for anyone who disagreed with the government. People would literally disappear from the streets for successive periods of 90 days with no reporting, no trial, no accountability. For those who've been tortured or deprived of the freedom to live securely, or who feel it's necessary for their mental or physical survival to seek foreign shores, they have it 100 times harder than we had it. And I feel for them. Hence this series of my boat sculptures. From foreign parts seeking refuge, this shows people on a raft undertaking a hugely precarious journey. The vertical sticks represent people of different clans or different cultural or racial groupings, all thrown together. The next one, adrift, shows the same group alone, drifting without momentum, going nowhere, just drifting. And the third one, our land is girt by sea, with its naval flags warning off all would-be comers, shows how frightened Australia's politicians have made the people of Australia, so that we're inward looking and guarding our shores, the sea being a literal moat around the country. I have a rich inner life with dreams galore, which I mull over for ages. You can't force ideas, you need to sit with them. A slow arrival is often best, and sometimes my work reflects an issue ages after I have started thinking about it. Dreams figured in the following bronze birds of prey. I had a series of recurring nightmares when my husband was having a rough time in business. He said he felt like he was being picked and he felt persecuted. I made Gossip 1, female, with ballet point shoes, as there is a notion of women being gossipy, although I do not think this is true. As the birds are bronzes made from molds of forms I did in wax, I could and did make multiples of these. Gossip 2 shows how by just changing one or two elements, you can make it different. As an aside, if one were inclined to make a flock of birds or a herd of any type of animal, this is one way of doing it. Sentinel is the guardsman who won't allow proper discourse. He wears bobber boots and won't be moved. The next one, Inquisitor, is the questioner who leans in with trick questions. When you think he's on your side, he isn't. And Predator wears sharp, piercing, almost dagger-like boots and is the most dangerous in this team of torturers. The dream stopped once I'd turned my angst into physical form. Then I made the barefoot high flyer who is about to soar into the sky without a care in the world. Birds show my tendency to anthropomorphize the animals I sculpt. This is also evident in the next group of seals, which I called Seals with Attitude. My husband finally, after many years of resistance from me, persuaded me to go on what he billed as a modest boat trip around New Zealand. Well, it turned out to be a huge boat with thousands of passengers, many of whom were very, very large. I watched in awe as they filled platter-sized plates from the buffet, then scoffed their food and then flopped onto deck chairs, wallowing about on deck like beached seals. When we returned home, I went to Taronga Zoo, saw a seal show, introduced myself to the seal trainer, explaining that I wanted to sculpt seals and was allowed into the seal enclosure to get a closer look at the star performers. I fell in love with the seals, saw how quirky and enduring they are, and embarked on this series, all of which I sold. The seals I made were about 3/4 life size, and I put them in sunglasses to show the craziness with which we bask in the sun. So this is about our human condition rather than about seals themselves. Siesta underscores the couch potato. The next one, On Watch, is doing what I was always doing when we were at the beach with our young children, always on watch. The next one, Cool Dude, represents the teenager who thinks he's rather flash. From generation to generation, shows the family group, and the importance of valuing that. And the last one, who, me, shows my first serious attempt at working in mosaics using stained glass. Experiences then are important sources of creative inspiration for me. 9 years ago, we had an Antarctic trip. This was on a very different sort of boat, with just 100 passengers, and it was adventure cruising. I was captivated by the different species of penguins that we saw. I made one from each of the 3 species we mainly saw for this series. One is a royal penguin, one is an Adelie, and one is a king penguin. Royal Night In is a comment on royalty generally. At the time, we were being shown the royals not as inaccessible icons, but as ordinary people. And I thought they must sometimes have pajama nights in front of the telly and bad hair days. So I put this royal penguin, a very scruffy species with untidy feathers on top, in a dressing gown and slippers. The Adelie species is smaller, and these little fellas waddled as though they're gaily dancing about, and I put this little chap in a smart waistcoat and called it, "Shall we dance?" as he tried to attract a mate. The rather regal king penguin is taller with smart orange markings, and when we saw them, they were molting, and they seemed to turn their backs as if to say, "Don't look at us like this." So I gave this king penguin a smart scarf to show off in and called her Queen, dressed for her king. My life's journey, which has involved recovery from 2 cancers, has been quite expressly shown in Life's Journey. The tree is representative of life itself, the light side showing life with hope and new growth. The reverse side, dark side, represents the end of life or death and shows a skeletal form with a spine and ribs. The boat is rocky, yet it is not overwhelmed by the waves sloping over the sides. It cuts through the waves and its movement is forward. The ship's cat, and every boat ship should have a cat, is in the sea at the stern of the boat, and the fish, which should be in the sea, is out of the water and is atop the tree. Things are definitely awry. The fish has a mutant double tail showing how we have mucked up our food source, and the big red nose is because it was Red Nose Day at the time, and the medical issue of premature death was uppermost in my mind. Themes show up in my mosaic practice. For example, I sometimes make clouds into my canvas. These have been quite emotional. Clouds move and change and are non-judgmental, and you can make anything of them that you want. I used to spend hours sitting in a chair in the oncology chemotherapy center, gazing out of the window with chemicals entering my body through a drip, whilst I watched the clouds in the sky, imagining all sorts of things. Between Heaven and Earth and On Cloud 9 show my journey through chemotherapy and my recovery from breast cancer. I had the notion that clouds always have a silver lining. Between Heaven and Earth shows this. And here, the silver lining of recovery goes around the entire Earth. The tiny figure on the top, looking down on the world from above, is me. On Cloud 9 reflects my gratitude to the medical profession for the superb treatment that I have received in beating 2 life-threatening illnesses. This cloud takes the form of a reclining woman, relaxing on Cloud 9, as the saying goes, with the sky and clouds decorating her form. My latest cloud, Clouded Senses, May 2020, shows my personal response to the pandemic. I just read an article in the Sydney Morning Herald this last Tuesday, which references Whitney Goodman, an American psychotherapy, and also reports on Sarah Berry's book about toxic positivity. The gist of it is that there's a difference between healthy positivity, which makes space for both reality and hope, and toxic positivity, which demands happiness in a sort of good vibe culture and which denies other emotions. Our politicians constantly urge us not to be aggrieved with platitudes such as other countries being worse off than us, which is true. But this sort of hollow chestnut shames people who can't muster positivity in times of distress. I want to be alert to and to be able to express what is not right. So embarking on this piece, which took me a year to do, I determined to be absolutely authentic to what I was feeling. My starting point then was the originally Japanese, but now universally recognized moral maxim of the three wise monkeys: see, speak, and hear no evil. As in turn, each monkey covers its eyes, mouth, and ears. This iconic image, which I'm sure you all know, eliminates all pretense. Here, in this work, my eyes are therefore prominent and for seeing it all with direct 20/20 vision. The prominent lips on top are for the speaking of truth. And hearing is shown by the trumpet form, much like we used to associate with his master's voice records, where the little dog sits with his cocked head listening. The trumpet form becomes a wavy line representing the ululating, wailing cry of anguish that African women make when expressing grief. But on a happier note, in the space between hearing, the trumpet, and the making of sound, the lips or mouth, I have placed musical notes to express the importance of music in our lives. Music is the universal salve, and I cannot imagine a life without music. Going to other senses, the hand represents making and busyness, essential to our happiness, but above all, it represents touch, which is essential for well-being. And this is something that we've been deprived of during the pandemic, where we've had to be socially distant from our family and friends. The small empty heart represents heartache. It's empty and aching, but it's still beating, showing life. The big red heart represents a full heart, and we are full of emotion. The dragon, which is dear to me as I'm a dragon boater, is breathing fire, and that shows the brave part of me that tries new things and is unafraid. The eel, on the other end, shows the meeker, more cautious part of me that slithers through the thick treacle of obstacles that are thrown our way. Underneath, there is an exotic school of fish swimming valiantly against the tide, but they're hidden. They represent the secret part that we all have. The sculpture turns freely on its base, which seemed important as clouds do move. Actually, all my clouds are mounted to allow movement. Lastly, I want to talk about my most recent work, Roots Schmoots, made last year. The title of this is simply affectionate, like Oedipus Schmiedipus. Remember when I said ideas need time to percolate? Well, this is an example. When we disembarked from our Antarctic trip in New Zealand 9 years ago, we hired a car to navigate our way to the southernmost on the southernmost road, which is not much trafficked, from Invercargill to Dunedin. We were dog-tired and shouldn't have been driving. Cutting the story short, we left the road, plunging a good many meters down a thickly wooded embankment, and might have died there if unable to get out of the car, as the crashed car, a write-off, was not visible from the road. It was a shocking accident, and we were lucky to survive it. We were able to squeeze ourselves out of the car and clamber up the slope to the road, where we were eventually, after some time, rescued by some young backpackers trundling along in a jalopy. Anyway, I had been fascinated by the windswept trees we'd been seeing just before we crashed. They bowed to the cold, harsh wind that comes directly off Antarctica, but somehow they're not broken and they survive. So in this work, I'm combining my themes of trees, which are symbolic of life, struggle for survival, and the importance of passing things on from generation to generation. We all come from somewhere. I think it's important to acknowledge that. Our roots are our foundation. It's important to have sturdy grounding. No feet of clay are allowed. You can see the huge foot in this work, which gives the work stability. There is a female form stretching along the trunk, and her arms morph into boughs that are gently outstretched and enfolding. This acknowledges the nurturing, caring position of the mother in the family. The gold and white gold smelty enhance the sense of the preciousness of life, of family, and of the passing on of her heritage from generation to generation. Life may involve struggle, but it can nevertheless not only survive, but indeed thrive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sally. Thank you so very much. That was thoroughly enjoyable, and just so comprehensive. The way your art practice has spanned so many different turns and twists, and you didn't even cover any of the ceramic.
No,
a lot of the ceramic training that you've been doing, and but I just wanted to say thank you very much for sharing that. And you always work so deeply from the heart. There's always a story, there's always a narrative. Everything means something. And the other thing, just to congratulate you on your tenacity with what you do. You turn up every time to class. You work really, really hard. You've always done work. You're always progressing. You're always challenging yourself. You're always seeking feedback, sharing, and discussion. And it's really fabulous. And thanks, Sally. That was very interesting.
Thank you.
And we are now going to be welcoming Saskia. The beautiful work that you're creating, Saskia, is just absolutely stunning. And you're going to discuss a little bit today about what's inspired you, a little bit about your history, the references that you're making, some of your practical ways of envisaging an exhibition. Now, one of the very exciting things that happened in Saskia's life is she was awarded the Oro Scholarship for mosaic. So she received that scholarship, I think it was 2018, end of 2019. And as part of that was a proposal to do an exhibition. And it was also part of Saskia's master's degree. And one of the wonderful things that Saskia has done is to create a digital version of what the exhibition might look like, which is a fantastic strategy. She's going to talk about that as well.
So thank you so much again to all of you for being here. This is so exciting, and as we get to do this over the last couple of years, if we can't meet in person, we can meet online, and that also means that we can meet across different continents and different time zones. So it's really wonderful to be here with all of you. I'm very grateful for being invited to talk about my work and about my inspirations and how I get to making those works I make, and basically my path and journey of creativity. So just a very quick sort of background. I was born in Czechoslovakia, and I came to Australia when I was 20 years old because I started to study English, and I really knew very little about Australia. It was almost a place beyond my imagination at the time, because it was quite unusual to travel so far in the early 90s. And I sort of, it was a beautiful experience to see Australia. I eventually ended up going back to Europe, but I ended up returning. And again, I thought I would only stay for another 6 months. And almost 25 years later, I'm still here and loving it. I've always loved art, and I used to go even as a child to galleries, and I used to read a lot of books about different artists and painters in particular. And then as a slightly older teenager, as I started to travel, particularly to the Mediterranean, my love of what I saw in the Mediterranean really, I've really connected with the place, and that's where I saw the first mosaics, and that's where I saw these beautiful sculptures, and all that was really sort of profound, had profound effect on my aesthetics, visual aesthetics, and also my love of art. Last year I completed Master of Arts at UNSW, which also was again another great way to expand the way I perceive art and understand the concept behind the work I do. Basically I started with mosaics approximately maybe 7 years ago. The very first day I decided to make a big garden mosaic. I met Marian Shapiro. Hello, Marian. and Marian basically was really the first person and my first tutor who really got me onto this path of contemporary mosaic. And I'm very indebted to Marian and grateful for her really nurturing my inspiration and guiding me through this beautiful process of learning how to make mosaics, of working with Smalti. And yeah, I was basically very, very lucky to have such a wonderful teacher and sort of supporter as Marian. I think before I sort of start talking about my creative journey, I would like to address the topic of the creative inspiration. And I thought about it, what it is that basically drives me apart from the love of art and the beauty aesthetics. And really, I think at the core of my creative inspiration and passion is curiosity. I look around and I look for different materials. I connect with basically my aesthetic ideal, and I always at the core of everything I do is this inherent curiosity. I want to know what a particular work is going to look like. I want to know what this material is going to do, how I can work with this particular material, how I can challenge myself and do something different to what I did before. So I think each piece that I create is almost as a personal challenge and some kind of satisfaction of my own curiosity to see where this journey takes me. So often I don't make things easy for myself, but I think this is what ultimately keeps me really interested and driven in expanding my own boundaries. And I had a teacher at the university who said that we don't really create unless we operate on these boundaries of being uncomfortable. And I think this is where we really grow as artists. This is when we really using inspiration from other artists and anything around us in life, we solidify when we're really pushing ourselves and go beyond what is comfortable in our own practice and what is somehow perhaps established, that we continue to push those boundaries. So I think this is my sort of personal definition of sort of solid creative inspiration and creative journey. So these are my sort of the first two mosaics. I always liked aerial photography, and when I started to work with Smalti in particular, I really at that time I was sort of more fond of this kind of visual abstraction. So the first two images, the orange one, which looks sort of like a river bed, and the other one which was inspired by the beach and the ocean. This is what comes from aerial photography. And from the very beginning, I was really interested in the different ways how one could lay the Smalti. As I was learning the different andamento, I must admit, I'm not the best andamento person when it comes to mosaic. I'm always curious in how I can create something that goes beyond the traditional. So I tried sort of different things, and the more I worked with natural stone, the more I sort of enjoyed the irregularities and sort of the surprises that often the natural stone presents. So these are some examples of my initial work. The green piece, that was basically a commission where I was told that the person who was going to receive this mosaic loves green color. So I created basically a piece which covers her and her partner and her child, and they sort of floating together on this happy green cloud. And then this more sort of monochromatic piece on a natural colors piece was when I really started to work with stone, and I completely fell in love with working with stone, and I started to use glass multi sort of in a more reduced way. And here are another two examples of my sort of primary smalty mosaics, where I experimented with painting the background with acrylic colors and using shards. I always loved antique sculpture, particularly Cycladic Etruscan sculpture. And whenever I seen sculptures in museums, galleries, or even in the streets, particularly in the Mediterranean Europe, I actually really loved the imperfections. For me, seeing a beautiful classic Greek sculpture is certainly a wonderful experience. However, I felt that often they were sort of copies of copies, and I've always embraced those sculptural creations where I could see something that was different, that was even possibly damaged. I often was more drawn to those sculptures where, you know, during the time, bits and pieces sort of were broken and fell off, because I believe that one of the main challenges of life is to embrace the imperfections of life and turn them into something beautiful. And this is where the main inspiration of this relief sculpture at the end came from. So I increasingly started to use natural stone, using some of the principles of contemporary mosaic, but I sort of started to create these more sculptural pieces, which were still relief, and there was a very little sort of depth to those works. And again, for me, the importance was more about I started to sort of explore the texture rather than the color. So I then started to look for different variations of how I could play with that texture, and perhaps by adding a minimal amount of color, or adding different materials. So here are some examples where I was sort of still with the monochromatic, but I was creating my own substrate in different ways, or I was adding a bit of color, and I was literally playing with the form and the texture in particular. So there are pieces where I used different types of glass, where I chiseled the stone, and I decided that I'm going to leave those marks of chisels on the stone, because I wanted that imperfection to be part of that aesthetic beauty. And I also wanted the piece to carry the marks of the human hand. This was always very important for me. So there are different ways.
I'm just going to jump in to say the scale of these is really important.
Yes,
these are very large.
Yes, some of them, this is not to scale. So
Yeah.
some of these pieces might be, let's say, 1/2 meter big. Those two images that might sort of remind you a little bit of Modigliani's work, they are 1.2. This was the largest substrate I could get from David and Marianne, and so they I think 1.2 meters large. So they're quite large and quite heavy. And again, this was I was exploring different stones. So one of those is made primarily with Australian shell limestone, which is a beautiful material, which I then currently use to make sculptures. And the other limestone was a calcified limestone, which I actually ended up getting from southern France. And it was, again, a very beautiful material to work with. As I sort of continued to make work, I was really interested in expanding into that third dimension and creating pieces which had more of that visual depth and were much more sculptural. So here are some examples of my experimentation of creating my own substrates. Most of these works were still sort of true to the relief sculpture, where I kept maintaining some kind of a background substrate. So I haven't been able to, at that point in time, to completely let go of the substrate. And even in this particular sculptural work, where there's more of that head, which is a sculpture, I'm still attaching it to that frame. So I'm still continuing to play with the relief in different ways. Also, as you probably see, that I go from these very abstract, colorful mosaics to primarily making heads. For a long time, I really could not quite understand what it is, why I constantly have this impetus to make heads. And it took me actually a number of years, and I was sort of, it was like peeling an onion, and bit by bit, I was getting closer to really understanding what it was. And for me, a great source of happiness in my life comes from connections with other people, comes from connections with the people who are in my life, my family, my friends. And I think this emphasis on the human connection is basically what inspires me to make heads, because people's faces and people's eyes are the first point of contact. This is the way how we build connection. When we communicate with others, we're looking at each other. It's the face, which is almost like an entry point, to the visual entry point to that particular person. So I think this is basically the reason why I keep returning to making heads more than anything. So this has been sort of my journey of coming closer to really starting to make sculptures. And eventually I gave myself this mission of letting go of the substrate or the relief altogether, and start making sculptures. And part of it was probably because I love mosaic so much that I wanted to continue to be true to mosaic and what mosaic represents. But obviously my creative practice was pushing me towards sculpture. So eventually I thought, okay, I'm going to let go and I'm going to focus on sculpture and see where that takes me. And in the process of preparing also an exhibition, which was going to be my Oro Award exhibition, which unfortunately has not happened so far. But anyway, I managed to sort of put together a small body of work, which I still want to expand on. And I also have written this artist statement or exhibition statement, as I was really thinking about the concept behind my work. And I realized that the concept behind my work was really a memory, my own imagination as a child. And it was so lovely to hear Sally talking about her connection to clouds and what clouds actually have meant for her, and how she sort of translated a difficult time of her life into making sculptures which represent clouds. And for me, when I was a child, I used to imagine that I float on this white cloud, and it's a space for me where I can be anything I want and anybody I want to be, where anything is possible. And it was almost as usually every evening when I was sort of lying in my bed, I would close my eyes and imagine that I'm on this white cloud, and it's a space of endless possibility for me. So the color white is strongly present in my work. And this was another thing where I was thinking, what is this calling? Why am I constantly making these monochromatic works when I do like color, but white seemed to always somehow dominate? So this was another sort of journey of me peeling this onion and finally understanding what this color white meant for me. And for me, it was this space, and still is this space of sort of happiness and these endless possibilities, this space where I can just imagine anything. So I guess I feel really comfortable in this kind of space where I'm able not to put constraints on myself and just be creative. So then I started to create this body of work, and this was during last year's lockdown. And during these last 2 years, the importance of human relationships and human connections have sort of acquired even a greater importance, because we realized how difficult it is to live in isolation, and how difficult it is not to be with the people we love and not to be able to embrace them and hear their voice and look into their eyes. It's not quite the same thing to do it through the computer screen. So I really started to, basically every piece is in a way dedicated to a person, and the people who could not be with me temporarily, or even the people who I knew I would never be able to see again. So I basically created each piece with a person in mind, and it was a beautiful way for me to connect with those people I could not be with at that time. And it enabled me to continue this journey of some philosophical analysis of my life, of my connection to others, and also of some greater issues happening in these sort of quite volatile times for many people. So these are sort of the examples of the work, and I go back to that sort of imperfection of life. And each of these works, basically, I had all these broken bits and pieces of this beautiful white shell limestone, which I absolutely love to work with because it's a softer stone, so it doesn't require me to have a lot of tools. I can literally use a file, I can use scrapers, I can use a light hammer to create those sculptural works I want. And I had all these broken bits and pieces of this beautiful shell limestone. So each piece basically started with the imperfection of the stone, the imperfection of the shape. And I tried to use that brokenness of the stone and its imperfections to create a piece of art. And for me personally, it was a really beautiful process, and it allowed me to focus on what the stone was bringing into my work. And the shell limestone is actually made, it's approximately 30 million years old, and you literally can see the little bits and pieces of shell in that work. So I also would enable those hard bits of the shell to dictate the shape of the work, and I would not try to eliminate them. So these works are full of imperfections, and I've really liked them for that. It sort of makes me happy that this kind of wabi, that I was able to carry on with this wabi-sabi philosophy, and the beauty of imperfection. I also like to maintain some kind of poetic presence of each piece. I like to leave things unexplained. I like when the viewer can connect in each artwork in their unique way, which doesn't necessarily may reflect my own concept behind the work, and might not necessarily be about what I'm trying to express with my own work. And for me, it is in a way a beautiful way a viewer can connect with each work and create and appropriate it in their own way. As I was making this body of sculptural work, I kept thinking how I could sort of come back to mosaic, and how I could connect these two loves of mine, which is sculpture and mosaic. And then I was invited to participate in virtual Patagonian symposium, which was run by Giulio Menossi. And I thought, well, this would be a great opportunity for me to actually take this another step further. So the theme was kaleidoscope of colors. And I thought, okay, I'm going to try to put together my sculptural work and my mosaic work. And this piece called Togetherness is Everything is the result of this particular project. And I personally feel like this is a culmination of all the work for me that I've done in the last 7 years. And I feel like I have found a way how to continue with making sculptures, but at the same time combine them with mosaic. I used all this different material, and what I started to, all those blue pieces that you see, I used the shell limestone and I painted it with acrylic color. So this was for me, because I always thought of how I could make my own tesserae, but not necessarily from clay, how I could use stone and create tesserae. So my idea is to sort of to continue to explore color, but creating my own tesserae by painting the stone I'm using. So this is just something I wanted to add. And for a while, I was really thinking about where I could possibly exhibit my sculptures and mosaics. And somehow a wide gallery I felt like it wasn't quite the space for this sort of work. So I kept walking through Sydney and looking at different sort of places. And then I remembered the Paddington Water Reservoir, which some of you may know. And it is a really beautiful space, which certainly invokes, because it has these beautiful arches and it has this outdoor and sort of semi-indoor area. It invokes the Italian aqueduct and sort of antiquity, and because my inspiration does come from antique, and what I sort of didn't mention, also modernist sculptures, I thought this would be a really beautiful place to exhibit. However, I was not able to secure the space for last year, and it's still uncertain whether I will be able to secure the space for this year. So I decided to simulate the exhibition and create this digital maquette, which first I thought I would just basically take images of the different spaces and place my work in those spaces. And these sculptures are, again, the first image is sort of to scale, but all these other images are not to scale. And I realized that creating a digital maquette of my own work enabled me to play with the space and the scale of my work. And in a way, without making the pieces themselves, I could in a way go into this new imaginary space where I could actually, in a way, play digitally with my different ideas, and later implement them in real life. So I took different images of these of the Sydney Water Reservoir, and then I started to place these my artworks digitally in the different spaces in different scale, and it really gave me a wonderful sort of inspiration and impetus to wanting to make works on a larger scale. And I certainly want to go there and then play with the different placements, and also what an exhibition actually can be. And if any of you are making site-specific work, this, I don't know if some of you may have done that already, but certainly this is a way to test the ideas and test what works, what doesn't, the different scales that of the individual works that may work for that particular space. So I discovered this tool because of necessity, and it's something that I will continue to use, and it certainly has given me another way how I can approach my creative process and how I can test my ideas. So I just wanted to show you this, and as a wonderful way to, you know, creating maybe works that you normally wouldn't, because you can test them in that particular space. So I think this basically concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions now or later. And yes, thank you again for inviting me to present.
Thank you so much, Saskia. That was just wonderful. It's, again, such a beautiful and diverse body of work, and it's so lovely to see your process from the initial slide of your where you started in mosaics, and beautiful work then, but just to see how it was using things as a springboard from one to the next, and how your creative practice has grown into this sculptural direction. And we've been very fortunate today to have Sally and you, Saskia, with both of you with this sculptural focus, as well as bringing in that sort of synthesis between sculpture and mosaic. And as you know, that's my particular passion as well. So I love seeing these things come together. And I'm just going to throw to questions from the group. If anybody has got a question, just wave at me.
Hi. Yeah, well, ever practical learners, if you're going to put these into a public space, do you protect from handling marks, from getting dirty? Because white works are just
yes,
so difficult.
It is easy to mark this stone if you have dirty fingers. That's possible. There is a sealer which you can purchase in Bunnings. I don't have the brand on top of my head at the moment, but I can certainly put that later in chat. And these works can be sealed. I mean, this stone is also often used for cladding outdoors. So it has surprisingly, it has a good durability. There are different colors of limestone, which is being quarried in Australia, and the darker it gets, it seems to get also sort of it seems to be a little bit more calcified, and it seems to be harder. So probably those slightly darker shades of limestone don't need to even be sealed. But certainly this shell limestone, which is the softest and most sensitive in a way, can, with a thin coat of sealer, it still maintains its beautiful color and it's well protected.
Thank you, Saskia.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marg. Okay, we're going to move on now to our third presenter, which is Galia Menin. And I've been very fortunate to be working with Galia for a few years now, and I've seen her work evolve and develop over that time. And this particular piece that she's going to talk about today has been in the making for a few years and is really just so beautiful. And I think having some inside information as to the inspiration behind it will give it all the more context. And I'm going to hand straight to Galia to give some introductory comments about the work and the process. And then what we're going to do is Galia has made a 9-minute video, which is, there are no words, it is just the slides of the process paired with the music that inspired this piece. And Galia, I'll hand over to you so you can give everybody a little bit of a background as to the composer and the piece and why, etc.
Okay. Thank you very much, Caitlin, and welcome everybody. I'm very pleased to be presenting this piece, which, as Caitlin said, has been a long time in the making. And it's actually all about music, because music and mosaic for me are just so inextricably linked. They are absolute partners, I think. For me, they are absolute partners. I mean, my background, my family, my parents came from Siberia, from eastern Siberia, and particularly my father's family were very much into classical music. And so that continued in our family, and I absolutely love music. Now, Sally, as you said, you can't imagine life without music, and I couldn't agree more. I couldn't imagine living without music, because it's like a very essence for me. It's the very essence of living. The fabulous feelings and emotions that one gets from listening to music, just amazing. I'm absolutely amazed at how black squiggles on 5 horizontal lines, when played by instruments, can create this feeling of joy or happiness, elation, sadness, nostalgia, all of these things just by playing music. Fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And actually, a number of notable people have made comments about music. And one of them, Plato, said that music gives a soul to the universe, wings to the mind, flight to the imagination, and life to everything. And really, I couldn't agree more. Also, my favorite composer, Jean Sibelius, talked about music being a mosaic. And he said that it's, for him, it was as if God had made this mosaic, had thrown all the pieces down to him and said to him, now create something from this. I mean, I think that is just a wonderful thing. And if you listen to his music, what he created is just truly fabulous, truly fabulous. But the piece that I really love Peter Sculthorpe. His music is, for me, I think is just essentially Australian. It's also quite unnerving, which I think is a really interesting feeling to get from listening to his music. Now, I've got to say, there are people who really can't stand Peter Sculthorpe's music, so I apologize to anyone in advance who doesn't like his music, because this is what's playing during the video. Now, well, it's based on the area Kakadu, and for him, he said it's about the land and the feel of the land. And there are a number of sort of feelings that you get from listening to this. It's, I have made a list here. It's energetic, unsettling. There's also a feeling of the very essence of the land that he is writing the music about. There's a timelessness to this piece of music as well, to the feel of it. A feeling of winding, flowing, and falling. The feeling of sizzling lightning. There is a sound within the piece that really sounds like lightning flashes. Clouds, swirling clouds. And the piece of music, the version of this piece of music that I chose to present has William Barton, who is an absolutely wonderful Indigenous composer, didgeridoo player, and singer. He is chanting at the beginning of it. And it's that fabulous winding, flowing, falling chant that I think is like the essence of this land, just flowing, just flowing. The piece is the first in this series, and it's been in the making for many years. Sort of life conspired to bring sort of any mosaic activity to pretty much a screaming halt. But anyway, now I'm able to just devote myself to creating this piece that I've really wanted to do for a few years. So here's a video. I hope you enjoyed listening to that and watching that.
Absolutely, that was fantastic. It's so lovely to see the different elements of the process as well matched to the music. And I think you've got a few more things to say, but I also wanted to ask, can you talk a little bit about the process that you went through? You did a lot of drawing, a lot of experimental mark making.
Yeah. What I needed to do to begin with was to just listen to the music and try to make marks with pens or a brush and ink, to really sort of try with a brush to maybe express the sound that I was hearing. And so I did that using a brush. But the thing that I found really difficult was with a pencil or a pen, or a brush, trying to get the look of the sound of lightning, really difficult. So then I went and collected some Banksia flowers that had just died off a bit and were dried. And so I found that dipping them in ink and squiggling on paper, I really got this wonderful sort of design that happened, that there is no way I could have drawn it, absolutely impossible. And so I've tried on the substrate to actually get that shape using the Banksia pod in the wet thin set, and then to put some pieces into the design. And the pieces that I used for that were the green peridot. It's a semi-precious stone that I think sort of gets some of that movement. But yeah, it was really a lot of drawing and rejecting and drawing and rejecting and trying various things. And I found it really difficult to get those sort of explosive sounds with a brush. Really, really difficult. But anyway, I think once I started doing the mosaic, and the substrate I made from layers of mesh, and then elevated it, probably it's about 2 centimeters above the actual substrate. The mesh substrate is about 2 centimeters above that, and then started mosaicing it directly into that shape. And the shapes actually were derived from large pieces of bark that had fallen off eucalypt trees just in the garden, and they are just the most wonderful shapes. And so I sort of rearranged them just a little, but sort of to get that flow and movement. Now, within this series, there's going to be about 4 or 5 pieces to this series. I'm planning different sorts of looks for that, but within it, I want to have the sound of that chant flowing through it. So I could be here for another 10 years trying to achieve this.
And you've also branched out into sculpture.
Yes,
yeah, and then there's a piece that you're going to be working on this coming weekend with it, which is a sculptural form that you've made, which is similar. So it's again so interesting to see the development and how you've explored the idea from an initial inspiration of the music to initial drawing, and then found that limiting, and then using found objects that related to the subject matter to make marks, and then to move away from traditional tesserae into gems and semi-precious stones and
rock. I mean, the main part of that is serpentine rock that comes from Tasmania, actually, from near Zeehan, I think. I bought it from a place in called Lunaris Gemstones, and they sent me this fabulous array of serpentine in a variety of ranges of green, from really dark to really light green with a lot of sort of creamy goldy look through it, with a bit of purple through it as well. It's the most wonderful rock. It really is just gorgeous. And I would love to say I went and collected it all myself, but I didn't.
Yeah.
But that would be good.
The range of colours as well is interesting. There, I also saw a lot of mookaite. Is it
There is mookaite, yes. That's sort of in the elevated pieces, sharp elevated pieces. Sharp. I seem to specialise in sharp. Within that mookaite also, within those elevated areas, I've also got some dalle de verre fragments that sort of provide a bit of a contrast between the solid look of mookaite and the transparent look of glass. So I like that sort of combination. And then through smaller pieces of amethyst and what else have I got? Carnelian, some smalty that are sort of cut into smaller pieces, and also some of the bronze gold smalty that are in there as well. So it's a combination of colours. And I'm not too sure. I think probably the next pieces are certainly not going to be in the same sort of colour, green colour. I will vary sort of each piece, I think, but they all have to relate to each other. I don't want them as sort of, stand out individual bits. There needs to be a continuation, because I want a continuation of that chant to flow through as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's so lovely the way you put it together with the music, and it's given us a real insight into the development of your idea and the development of the piece, and we look forward to seeing the rest of the series as they evolve.
So do I.
And we're going to, I will take questions at the end if there's any questions for Galia, but we are going to move on now to our final speaker, who is Rachel Bremner. But I would like to formally welcome Rachel.
Just like to say that if I could have put something on chat, if I could have worked out how to do it, I've really enjoyed seeing all your beautiful work and hearing all what's behind it all. It's been really lovely. Thanks, guys.
Indeed it has, and it is again very interesting to see that relationship of the music in the work too, and Rachel, as a previous professional musician, music is an incredibly important part of your practice as well, and your inspiration. And so I'd be very interested to hear what you have to say today. Just before we start though, Rachel's just a very special person in my life, and I would consider her one of my mosaic mentors, and I have quite a few, but Rachel's been there nudging me along in my practice since the beginning, gently encouraging or steering and suggesting, and always in such a gentle and loving way, and always so generous with your experience as well, and your knowledge and your time, and you bring something so beautiful to the mosaic community. Everybody here today does, but your work is really just something else. And I think it was when I first saw your work, I was just like, I want to do, I love this. And it's just all gone from there. So, so Rachel selected how many images? About 7 images to discuss. And yeah, okay, away we go.
So this piece I did in, I think it was 2017. And like most of my pieces, it starts out with just one piece usually, or a couple of pieces. And I don't have a plan, so I never draw out or even visual. I'm improvising as I go. But in this case, I put in these darker lines, was the first thing I put in. And then I just start. And I love that way of working, because although it's very slow, because working out composition as you go, for me, is very engrossing, but it's hard sometimes keeping a sense of the whole and where you might go in any direction, having to spread on some adhesive and then scrape it off to go somewhere else. But it suits me. I find that if I have an image that I'm working to, that I feel like I'm hemmed in terms of using mosaic to be able to express something that's driven by the material, which is really important to me in my work, to use mosaic for its own special qualities. So also with a lot of my work, when I finished a piece, I often make the titles up after I finished, because also because I'm working in such a small area very closely, it takes me a couple of days, sometimes a week, to look at the piece and start to feel it as a whole piece. And as music is a really important part of my life still, when I make mosaics, I really feel like I'm making music. It's exactly the same sensation. So, and there's something really joyful about this piece. So I had been listening to Mozart's Exultate Jubilate, and so that's how this one got its name. And I did another one after this, which is the same size. They actually work pretty well as a pair, which is called Cadenza, and it's in slightly different colours, but it's yeah, they work really well as a pair. And I like that idea of the sort of happy, jubilant expression, and then the idea of a cadenza where you take some small thing and improvise on it. Like in a concerto or something, you've got a cadenza. That's your chance to do your take on, say, Mozart's, the piece that you've just been playing. This one I did in 2017 too, but actually the first part of it, which is the smaller of the two shapes, was just well, not an exercise, me just playing with some marble that I just got from a new supplier in Melbourne. I'd been through their skip bins and come home with all this marble, and I just couldn't wait to use it. So I just mucked around on a piece of polystyrene foam that I'd cut before that. And it was just the same thing. It was just a mucking about improvisation, checking out how they cut and that. And when I finished it, I mean, it was just lying flat on the floor, you know, like it was a flat sort of table type of piece but it was raised and shaped. And it wasn't meant to be anything, but there was something really calming and nurturing about it. And although I would never have used it for anything, I just had it sitting in my shed and I just kept going back to it and actually really liking it. So a few years later, I decided to make it into this piece. So I stuck I made a board the same shape. And while I was making it, part of the thing of nurturing was that it just really felt like something I needed to look after and hold like a child. So this piece called Motherhood, just basically, it's like an expression of the nurturing that I've received and given as a mum.
Mm.
So this piece I went up to the Bay of Fires on the east coast of Tasmania, maybe about 4 years ago with my daughter. And we went to this place called Cozy Corner. And I don't know if you know the Bay of Fires, but it's famous for the sort of red lichen, orange lichen against the blue sea on these absolutely enormous rock formations that you can walk into, and they're all almost like, it's like walking into a church. It just there's something amazingly sort of powerful and moving to just see these huge, beautifully decorated rocks and be in there. It's just, yeah. Anyway, I came home and felt like I wanted to convey some of that sort of grounding feeling that it had given me to stand in these rocks. Yeah, so this was it. It was a kind of abstracted one, but
it was a response to your experience of the place. So the way, I suppose, the light, the colours, the textures, the surfaces of that place impacted you.
Yeah.
And then sort of a diluting and a distilling of those.
Yeah.
And then intuitively these things then come in terms of the mosaic, which isn't really an organised and planned mosaic. As you say, you work intuitively, so you're responding to the material as you lay it down. However, it's still coming from this distillation of your experience of the world.
Yeah.
In a way, yeah.
And sitting in my living room, it's one I don't think I'll ever part with. That's something about it, that probably because it took me so long.
And just incredibly small pieces as well, Rachel. When we look into this detail, I can see, 2 millimeters, 3 millimeter tesserae in here, or absolutely incredibly small. And do you predominantly use the hammer and hardy? Do you nipper these, or you don't nipper them? You do it all with a hammer?
Occasionally, but most of the time I nip gold sometimes, because some of the golds just shatter.
Yeah.
But with mostly I do the small pieces with hammer and hardy. I'll cut up a whole lot of them at once, have them in a tray.
And that's another interesting thing about your process that something I learned from you, is that you sort of batch prepare a lot of pieces in first. So you spend sort of a time of immersion just cutting.
Yes.
And when you're in that time, or immersive time of cutting, it's almost like a meditative process that you go into some sort of inner focus. I mean, really, you can't not concentrate, because you'll chop your hand off, won't you? Or you'll slice it and you'll stick a bit of a shard straight through your finger. So that's a technique it's a system that a lot of people do use, where you sit with a material and you get to know that material. And in a way, what you were saying earlier has resonance to this, because you as you cut that material, you come to know it in a way that it reveals itself to you. It reveals its qualities.
And I mean, sorry.
No, you go on.
Initially, when I, first started using the hammer and hardy, I would, cut a box of kind of same size pieces. And now when I'm cutting a real range of size, and, I might have a couple of trays, but some for small bits, longer bits. But I like the differences. I'm bored by too much sameness in the pieces. I like the individuality. Like I like the the roti smalty blocks, because they've got faults in them, and which is why they sell them off cheaper. But they're the ones that cut in the most interesting way. If things cut too predictably, I get bored.
So a constant sort of investigation of the material, the surface qualities, how they relate to each other. And in this particular work, you're using quite very different materials, with the smalty being the colour and the reflectivity, and then the slate with a more matte surface. Do you want to talk about this one?
This is the earliest of all the pieces here, and I think it was 2013. It was after I came back from Chicago for the second time, and I did a series kind of about emotions, about how inevitable they are. And this was my favourite of them. There's something else I like is when I look back at pieces that I've done in the past, and I can still surprise myself when I'm looking at them. Like I get a surprise, and that draws me in. And I like that about this one.
Well, I think that's something about all your work, is it reveals itself to you, and that's something that is a mark of a really successful artwork in any medium, not just mosaic, is when you initially view a work, you experience something about that work, but then as you come to know the work and spend time with the work and visually explore the work, particularly with mosaic under different lights, because every time of day, morning, evening, artificial light, natural light, rainy days, sunny days, you've got different light, and it becomes something new or something different, and it offers more and more. And then to hear you say that even you discover more and you surprise yourself when you look back at your work, and that's fantastic. It's the longer you sit with a piece and get to know a piece, the more it reveals to you.
And I can quite often look at something and just think, where the hell did that come from? Like, how did I come up with that? I don't know. And I get that sometimes after a few days after I finished a piece, and I'll be just thinking, oh, it just doesn't work, and then when I've sat with it for a few days, drawn into it and see, that actually there's a lot I like about it, or and that I'm happy with it.
I think it's a common thing though for when you initially finish a work, so that there's sort of it's like you've just given birth to it. And for those of us who have given birth, you sort of feel like you've been slapped in the head and you're feeling assaulted, and you kind of traumatized in a way. You kind of got this work out, and you're too close to it to even really understand what it is you've done, or to understand its qualities. And then in time, you can come back to it and start to appreciate actually what you created. And so another thing that we need to share here, Rachel, is that you've been more recently exploring ceramics a lot more with creating vessels, and also ceramic inclusions that you then include in your mosaic work. And so I think this second series of images here, we've got four images, are works that are for a show that you're working towards. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Maybe some of you already know, but I don't like how much I have to use words to explain the meaning behind my work. When I played the violin, that was what I loved about it, was that I could just stand up and express what I wanted to express without actually having to put words to it. And when I started putting mosaics out there, it's just like something you have to do. Like, you have to write stuff about your work, explaining what it means to people, or you can't apply for an exhibition, or you can't apply for a grant, or you can't do lots of things. And so I really struggled with that, because I actually feel like for my work that then changes how the viewer perceives it. They've got a predetermined sort of explanation, and I don't want that. I just want people to experience whatever it means to them. So it's been really important for me to, it's become more important for me to, sometimes I've written an artist statement for something, and I'll have someone come back and say, no, it needs to be more, you need to explain more about your concepts, or it's not, basically it's not art speak enough. So with this exhibition that I was supposed to do at the end of last year, but I had to cancel it, I decided to do the premise of the exhibition that it was going to be called Songs Without Words. And so each piece was related to all of the others, and I was hoping to hang it in almost like a manuscript in the organisation of the pieces. But there would be no titles with any of them. They would all just be called songs. And because I would have been sitting that exhibition, the nice thing for me is sitting watching people respond to the work. finding out what it means to them, because a lot of people have in these exhibitions that I've done before have come up and chatted to me about particular pieces that they liked and why they liked them, and that's been really a really lovely thing for me to watch. So yeah, and I've been really enjoying the freedom of just it not having to be anything but just what I need to get out of my system.
And you've been quite, you defend that creative space quite fiercely, and I think that's really admirable. That, you know, in our other interview that we did a few weeks ago, we discussed that. That video is on YouTube now if anyone wants to watch it. But Rachel was discussing how, you know, as a member of an orchestra, that you were bound to the directions or the direction of the conductor and the boundaries of the piece. Whereas in your own practice, you fiercely defend that independence of what you do, where how your work develops and evolves.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us have, but I mean, especially because that was how it was in music. You could never do anything completely the way you wanted to do it, because you always have to, when you're playing with other people, which is what I was doing most of the time, like in orchestras and chamber music groups, or even if I'm playing with piano. And for me, the mosaic was the reason why I enjoyed it so much, was because I just didn't have to take into account anyone else's upsetting anyone or whether they liked it or not. It was just for me, for myself, this place where I could do whatever I liked. And in a way, the best thing about that was that I could risk everything, and I could, it wasn't going to harm anyone or disappoint anyone. And I still find that if I'm feeling too comfortable with when I'm making a mosaic, I'll push it to I don't like feeling comfortable when I'm working in mosaic. I need to feel discomfort to push things as far as I can. And if it feels like it's too comfortable, I'll put a problem in there for me to solve. I'll pick up some piece of material that looks like it's not going to fit in there at all, and then have to solve it. I do a lot of that, which is really good because it just completely engages my brain, and it's like a rest from everything else going on in the world at the moment or whatever. And I think too, the thing that's really important to me is that as music has always been for me a thing that can uplift me, but it can also soothe me and calm me and make me feel like listening to a piece of music that really moves me, it can be like having a friend sitting next to you just when you're feeling really bad, not doing anything, but letting you know that someone else has been feeling similar things to you. And I think that's what I've always tried to do in music, and what I want to do is in a way comfort people, like for people to just feel something where they just feel part of that they've got a relationship to the world. So I mean, that's what I try to do. This piece was just in that horrific bushfire year, and I just because I live in the bush and I've loved it. I've lived here for like 30 years or something, and it's just the most beautiful place to live. But the last few summers in Australia have been, I just get scared now every time it gets to sort of beginning of November, I'm worried about fire. We've been very lucky this year, but sometimes I'd like to take things that I'm struggling with, that like anxiety about that or other things in my life, not necessarily to represent them, but more to try and make something out of something that's making me uncomfortable, that helps me to feel like I can sit with it. It's like the process of doing this piece helped me just sit in this place where I was thinking about fire, but I was doing something that was to make something that was expressively beautiful, even if it was about a hard thing, which is also sometimes what music and art do. Give you, they can put beauty into hard things as well.
It's simultaneously, it's at the same time, it's it's violent, there's a horror to that image. Ferocity, energy, anger, movement, but then also incredibly beautiful as at the same time, and almost soft and furry, and and it is wonderful how we're able to use our practice to process events in our lives or particular experiences in our lives. And I think we all do that in a way, and whether it's to soothe or to make comment about or to help us process and digest, or it's something different to everyone. The process is different for every individual because everyone's experience is different, obviously. So but it's lovely to see how you've been able to sustain that and sustain your individuality as well. Like you're uncompromisingly yourself, and I think that's something that a lot of us can learn from you, is that you've studied and practiced and acquired the techniques and skills and knowledge needed to make well-made, well-resolved mosaics that respect the mosaic language, but also push the boundaries of mosaic. And that's really, I think, the intimacy of your work as well is something that we can learn from, in that you know the language, and then now you've got all those skills, and then you almost go inward and just make it. And then I think probably the whole thing that I can add to this creative inspiration discussion is that inspiration for me comes during work a lot of the time. So it's even when I'm feeling like I've got nothing, I've got nothing, start making something, cut something, lay something, break something, sit with the hammer, start drawing, start sketching, just doing. And when you're getting yourself into that part of your brain where you're doing, then there's space for things to come up without that sort of conscious brain sort of smashing on the top all the time of your process and trying to channel it this way or that way.
Yeah, totally agree.
So Rachel, thank you so much for sharing this with us today. And
all your work.
Oh, you're most welcome. You're most welcome. But before, I've got a few wrap-up comments, but I would just like to see if there's any questions from the group for you. Yes, Tani, I see your hand.
When you work so intuitively, one of the things that I can relate to what you do is you start with a piece, and then everything else moves around that piece, and it becomes amplified as you go. The piece that you showed that is like mother and child, the smaller piece that you started initially. Yeah. How did you get the shape of that? Was that something that came as you worked, or was it something that you started with?
No, it was just that piece of polystyrene. I'd sort of just been mucking around with maybe doing something onto polystyrene, and it had, because I'd made it, like a couple of weeks ago, it was just sitting there in my shed. And when I bought all this marble home, I just thought, right, I'll just,
chuck it on that.
I'll start straight away with this marble. So I started using it on that. And then, and then the other shape I just cut out to match that one, and then stuck that on the previous, stuck that one to the one that I cut out.
Okay.
So I didn't know that it was going to be like that until that just happened.
Emerged. Yeah.
Thank you, Tani.
Awesome body of work, girl.
Oh, thank you. Nice to see your face.
Yeah, it's been wonderful to have you today, Rachel. And we are going to finish up now. I've just got a couple of closing comments. My first closing comment is to thank all of our presenters, each and every one of you, for all the preparation that you put into today. I know how much each of you has put into the organisation and the curation of images and the technology, etc. We really appreciate it. And this is such a valuable resource for those in the mosaic community interested in learning more, for students, artists from other disciplines. And it really shows us that there is not one way of expressing, there's not one way of being as an artist. There are many, multiple, varied, diverse ways to be, to express, to work, to process. And I'm hoping that what we're doing in these sessions really does exemplify that. There's no right way, there's no wrong way. There's room for so much. So thank you to those presenters. And I hope you all have a lovely evening. For some of you, it's early evening, late evening. For some of you, it's midday. So enjoy your Sunday, enjoy your afternoon or evening, wherever you are. And thank you for joining us. And I will hopefully see you all soon.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. And thank you for all your wonderful work and creating this amazing platform for all of us. It's really great.
You're most welcome. You're most welcome. Yeah. You're most welcome. And lovely to see you all, and best wishes, and see you again soon.
Bye.
Bye.